Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back thousands of years into the flickering shadows of an ancient Egyptian bedroom, where the air smells of burning linseed oil, sweet myrrh, and just a hint of river mud. You're standing on a cool mud brick floor, the desert heat still radiating gently through the walls as the sun dips below the Nile. You look around, expecting monumental statues or golden sarcophagi, but instead your eyes land on something surprisingly small, right next to the sleeping mat. It is a tiny, meticulously carved wooden bed, no longer than your forearm, complete with miniature linen sheets and a microscopic headrest. Now, let's be honest. If you suddenly found yourself dropped into a working-class home in ancient Thebes without your modern plumbing or air conditioning, you probably won't survive this experience for more than 48 hours, mostly because of the mosquitoes and the lack of iced coffee. But tonight you are just an observer, unravelling a beautiful, quiet mystery of domestic life. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across the room, careful not to trip over a stray clay jar, and bend down to examine this microscopic piece of furniture. It looks exactly like a real Egyptian bed, featuring legs carved to resemble the paws of a lion, tapering down to elegant supports. Mainstream archaeology tells us that these miniature beds, frequently uncovered in the ruins of domestic spaces like Deir el-Medina, were not toys for children, but sacred furniture for household deities. To the modern eye, it looks like a high-end dollhouse accessory, but to you, a resident of the New Kingdom, it is a vital piece of spiritual infrastructure. You notice that the linen wrapped around the tiny frame is woven with the same precision as a royal kilt, though it is currently covered in a fine layer of desert dust. A quirky fringe theory, popular in early 19th century amateur archaeology circles, actually suggested these tiny structures were proto-incubators for sacred scarab beetles, though serious scholars quickly dismissed the idea of giving bugs their own master suites. Instead, you realise this microcouch serves a far deeper purpose. It acts as a physical landing pad for the unseen forces of the cosmos. Historians still argue whether these beds were meant to host the physical manifestations of the gods during the night, or if they simply functioned as symbolic votive offerings to secure sweet dreams for the human sleepers nearby. As you sit cross-legged on the floor watching the oil lamp flicker, you realise how terrifying the night is without electricity. The darkness outside isn't just empty space. To you it feels alive, teeming with chaotic spirits, venomous scorpions and unseen predators. This tiny bed is your first line of defence, a cosy bribe for a passing deity to sit down, relax, and keep watch over your soul while you drift away. You lean your head against the cool plaster wall, watching the shadows stretch across the tiny lion-legged bed. If you are going to survive the night in this mud brick room, you need to know exactly who is occupying that miniature piece of furniture. You look closer at the headboard of the tiny bed and spot a familiar, comforting visage carved into the wood. It is a wide, bearded face with a protruding tongue, a flat nose and a crown of tall feathers. This is Bes, the fierce dwarf deity of the Egyptian home. Unlike the grand, distant gods like Amun-Ra or Osiris, who require massive stone temples and armies of shaven-headed priests, Bes is a blue-collar god. He doesn't care about golden monuments, he cares about your bedroom. Mainstream historical consensus confirms that Bes was the ultimate protector of the domestic sphere, specifically tasked with guarding pregnant women, newborn babies, and vulnerable sleepers from the terrors of the night. He is short, stout, and intentionally ugly, designed to scare away the literal and metaphorical demons lurking in the dark. You can't help but smile at the thought of this ancient cosmic bouncer stationed right next to your pillow. He is the original nightlight, only instead of a soft glow, he uses a terrifying scowl and a bronze dagger to keep you safe. On the more unusual side of things, some eccentric early 20th century occultists claimed that Bes was actually an ancient extraterrestrial visitor whose short stature and large head were misinterpreted by the locals. Because of course, ancient humans couldn't possibly invent a chubby protector god without alien intervention. Back in reality, historians still argue whether Bes originated locally within the Nile Valley, or if his worship was imported from the southern lands of Punt, as his distinct forward-facing depiction differs wildly from the traditional profile views used for other Egyptian deities. You watch the flickering lamplight dance across his carved wooden face, almost convincing yourself that his tongue twitched. To make him feel even more welcome, you reach into a small clay jar and retrieve a fresh sprig of sweet marjoram, gently placing it at the foot of his tiny mattress. You know that if Bess is happy, he will beat his small tambourine throughout the night, making a spiritual racket that drives away bad dreams and malicious ghosts. If he is unhappy, well, remember that crocodile dung sunscreen your neighbour tried to sell you yesterday? That will be the least of your worries. You adjust your position on the reed mat, feeling a bit safer knowing that the fiercest, funniest little protector in the cosmos has a comfortable place to sit and watch over your slumber. You shift your weight on the reed mat, your muscles relaxing as the deep desert stillness settles over the house. But you can't just expect Bess to pull an all-night security shift for free. In ancient Egypt, the relationship with the divine is entirely transactional. You need to provide room and board for your cosmic guests. You reach for a small, shallow ceramic bowl sitting nearby and carefully place it right next to the tiny bed. Mainstream Egyptological research shows that domestic altars and miniature beds were regularly supplied with actual food and drink offerings, including miniature loaves of bread, small figs and drops of beer or wine, to sustain the spirit of the deity while they inhabited the home. You pour a few drops of thick, sweet barley beer into the bowl, watching the liquid catch the amber glow of the oil lamp. It feels a bit like leaving cookies out for Santa, except your ancient Egyptian Santa is a short, bearded warrior deity who might stab an evil spirit in the face while you sleep. A quirky, fringe hypothesis floated by a fringe French historian in the 1970s proposed that these miniature food offerings were actually meant to poison domestic mice, using beer laced with local nightshade, though excavations have never found any toxic chemical residues to support this rather cynical view. Instead, the gesture is purely spiritual and deeply affectionate. Historians still argue whether these daily rituals were performed exclusively by the matriarch of the household, acting as a domestic priestess, or if every family member took turns tending to the tiny shrine. You smooth out the microscopic linen sheets on the bed with the tip of your finger, making sure there are no wrinkles that might upset a discerning god. You know that keeping the household spirits satisfied is your only insurance policy against the chaos outside. If the spirits are fed, they remain tethered to your home, creating a protective bubble around your family. You glance toward the dark doorway leading out to the courtyard, remembering the stories you heard at the marketplace today about wandering ghosts who didn't get a proper burial and now haunt the living. But looking back at the tiny bed, with its fresh offering of beer and its miniature lion paws standing firm on the mud floor, you feel a wave of calm. You've done your duty, the cosmic rent is paid, and the small protector of the night has everything he needs to stay comfortable and vigilant. You lie back onto your sleeping mat, adjusting your neck onto a curved wooden headrest. This headrest elevates your skull several inches off the floor, keeping your elaborate hairstyle intact and allowing the evening breeze to cool the back of your neck. Mainstream archaeological consensus tells us that these headrests were often inscribed with protective spells and images of Bess to safeguard the sleeper's vulnerable head, which the Egyptians believed was the primary entry point for wandering spirits. It isn't exactly a plush memory foam pillow, and it takes some getting used to, but tonight it is your gateway to the perilous Egyptian dreamscape. For you, dreaming isn't just a random firing of neurons, it is a literal journey into another dimension. When you close your eyes, your soul travels to a realm where the boundary between the living and the dead blurs. A quirky fringe theory from the late 1990s suggested that these rigid headrests were designed to induce mild sleep apnea and vivid hallucinations, allowing ancient priests to converse with cosmic entities, though modern sleep studies show they actually provide excellent spinal alignment once you get past the initial stiffness. Historians still argue whether ordinary Egyptians viewed bad dreams as a symptom of psychological stress or as a literal physical attack by wandering demons seeking a doorway back into the physical world. To ensure your safe return from this nightly voyage, you look over at your miniature deity bed one last time. Next to it sits a small clay amulet shaped like an eye of Horus, gleaming faintly in the dying embers of the oil lamp. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen your neighbour recommended to keep away the sunburn? Well, tonight you are relying on much stronger magic to keep away the nightmares. Bess is sitting on his micro-couch. The beer offering is set, and your headrest is charged with protective spells. You close your eyes, letting the soft hum of the desert wind carry you away. confident that your tiny domestic bodyguard will stand between your soul and the terrors of the deep dark. You wake up to the first pale streaks of dawn filtering through the high, narrow window of your room, the cool morning air chasing away the heavy shadows of the night. You sit up from your wooden headrest, your soul safely returned from the dreamscape, and glance down at the tiny bed. Bess is still there, his carved wooden eyes staring steadfastly forward, having successfully held the line against the invisible terrors of the dark. Mainstream historical scholarship traces how these intimate domestic rituals of the pharaonic era eventually evolved and blended into the Greco-Roman period, where the physical microbeds slowly faded from popularity, yet the core practice of keeping small, localized household shrines survived well into late antiquity. It is fascinating to see how the human need for domestic protection never truly changes, even as the centuries roll past. A quirky fringe theory popular on modern internet forums claims that our current tradition of leaving out decorative porcelain figurines or keeping pet beds for cats, who famously stare at empty corners as if watching invisible spirits, is a direct genetic memory inherited from these ancient Egyptian deity couches, though mainstream anthropologists generally attribute these modern habits to simple companionship rather than a lingering fear of Bronze Age demons. Still, as you watch the morning light illuminate the dust motes dancing over the miniature lion paws, you can see the thread connecting your ancient fears to modern comforts. Historians still argue whether the decline of these specific miniature furniture offerings was caused by the rise of state-enforced monotheism, or if families simply transitioned to more portable, hidden amulets as political structures shifted. Regardless of the changing eras, the emotion behind the tiny bed remains perfectly clear. It is the universal human desire to feel safe in the dark, to carve out a small sacred sanctuary of peace within a chaotic world. You pick up the small ceramic bowl, pouring the remaining drops of the morning beer offering out onto the dry earth outside your door, completing the cycle of the night. As the ancient sun rises higher over the Nile, warming the mud brick walls and calling the bustling city of Thebes to life, the vibrant sounds of the marketplace begin to echo from a distance. The long journey through the mystical night is finally complete, and the protective magic of the household gods can rest until the darkness returns once more. The room grows brighter, the flickering oil lamp goes out, and a deep, tranquil quiet settles over your mind. Your thoughts begin to drift, slowing down with the rhythm of the waking world, leaving behind the heavy mysteries of the past. You can rest easy now, wrapped in the comforting knowledge that humanity has always found a way to look after its guardians, just as those guardians have looked after us. The desert wind softens to a gentle whisper. The ancient world fades away into a peaceful, distant memory, and you're left in perfect, serene stillness. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping out into the vast whispering grasslands of 13th century Mongolia, where the wind never truly stops and the horizon stretches out into absolute infinity. You're galloping through the dark, feeling the rhythmic heavy thud of hooves against the dry earth while a sea of wild grass brushes against your leather boots. You look up, and the sky is an ocean of cold, brilliant stars, completely untouched by modern light pollution. Now, let's be honest. If you suddenly found yourself drafted into Genghis Khan's elite postal courier network without your memory foam mattress, GPS navigation, or synthetic fabrics, you probably won't survive this experience for more than 24 hours, mostly because your thighs would turn to raw steak and your spine would simply quit its job. But tonight, you're just an observer, easing into the hypnotic cadence of an endless journey across the steppe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull gently on the horse's braided leather reins, slowing your mount to a steady trot as a small, flickering light finally appears in the distance. This is Nertu, one of the vital postal relay stations established by the Mongol Empire to keep communication moving across Asia at unprecedented speeds. Mainstream historical research establishes that this sophisticated relay network allowed messages to travel thousands of miles in a matter of days, with stations positioned roughly 25 to 30 miles apart, the exact distance a hardy Mongolian horse could travel at a full gallop before collapsing from exhaustion. For you, this distant light means a temporary reprieve from the biting wind, a chance to trade your sweating, heavy-breathing mount for a fresh animal, and perhaps, if the universe is kind, a few minutes to close your eyes. A quirky fringe theory, popular among 19th century armchair historians, suggested that these remote relay stations were connected by an elaborate system of underground acoustic tubes used to shout messages across the desert, though serious scholars have verified that the Empire relied entirely on flesh and blood riders, pushing themselves to the absolute limit. Instead of high-tech plumbing, you find a collection of simple wooden corrals and a couple of dome-shaped tents. Historians still argue whether ordinary citizens living near these stations viewed their mandatory duty of providing fresh horses and food as a crushing exploitative tax burden, or as a proud, patriotic contribution to the state's security. As you ride into the station's perimeter, the smell of wood smoke and boiling mutton washes over you, momentarily replacing the sharp scent of horse sweat. Your body feels heavy, every muscle aching from the relentless friction of the wooden saddle tree beneath you. You slide down from the stirrups, your feet hitting the hard-packed dirt with a dull thud, your knees wobbling slightly as they remember how to support human weight instead of gripping an animal's flanks. You hand the reins to a waiting attendant, knowing that your rest here will be incredibly brief before the trail calls you back into the dark. You lean your back against the solid wooden post of the horse corral, your eyes growing heavy as you wait for the station attendants to finish saddling your next mount. But as an elite messenger, you can't always rely on a warm bed or a stationary shelter to catch your breath. Sometimes, the urgency of the Great Khan's decrees requires you to master the art of sleeping, while actively moving across the wilderness. Mainstream historical accounts from medieval travellers confirm that Mongol riders frequently slept directly in the saddle during long-distance journeys, tying themselves tightly to their horses or leaning forward against the animal's thick mane to keep from tumbling off during a sudden drop in terrain. It takes a terrifying amount of trust and coordination, but your body has adapted to the rhythm. You lift your foot back into the iron stirrup, pulling yourself up onto a fresh, stocky mare. The saddle isn't a soft, padded luxury. It is a rigid construction of wood and horn, designed to distribute your weight evenly across the horse's back over hundreds of miles. To catch a few minutes of rest while moving, you adjust your balance, sinking your center of gravity deep into the stirrups and letting your hips mimic the fluid, rolling gait of the mare. A quirky fringe tidbit from early European chronicles claimed that these riders possessed a physiological mutation that allowed their knee joints to lock completely like a horse's legs, allowing them to stand upright in the saddle while totally unconscious. A bit of sensationalized folklore that grossly underestimated the sheer power of human muscle memory in grueling training. In reality, the technique relies on rhythmic micro-sleeps. You close your eyes for 30 seconds, let your mind drift into a shallow grey zone, and then snap back to alertness as the horse shifts its weight over a patch of loose gravel. Historians still argue whether these riders utilize specialized high-backed saddles, explicitly engineered to support a sleeping person's torso, or if they simply relied on traditional utilitarian gear combined with absolute raw exhaustion to stay upright. Remember that excruciating muscle pain you felt when your knees first wobbled on the dirt outside? Out here on the open plain, that pain becomes a steady, dull background noise, a rhythmic metronome that actually helps lull your brain into a state of semi-conscious rest, while the horse guides itself along the well-worn postal trail. The fading twilight finally reveals a small, flickering beacon of light on the horizon, a yam relay station, rising out of the darkening grass like a lonely island in a vast ocean. Your horse catches the scent of the outpost and instinctively quickens its pace, eager for rest, while your own exhausted brain craves nothing more than a few minutes off this wooden saddle. As you ride into the bustling compound, a flurry of activity erupts around you. Station attendants rush out into the cold night air, their breath blooming in pale clouds under the moonlight. Because you carry the prestigious Imperial Pazer, nobody wastes any time. Before your feet even touch the dirt, a fresh, energetic mount is being led out of the corral to replace your lathered, heavy-breathing horse. Mainstream historical fact emphasizes that these yam stations were the lifeblood of the Empire's administration, meticulously spaced roughly 25 to 30 miles apart. The exact distance a horse could travel at top speed before requiring a rest. You slide down from the saddle, and for a terrifying second, your legs refuse to cooperate, feeling like two useless pillars of jelly. You stumble slightly, catching yourself on the wooden hitching post, before staggering toward the warmth of the central yurt. Inside, the air is thick with the rich, savoury smell of boiling mutton and the comforting aroma of burning sheep dung. You don't have time for a full night's rest, so you must maximise every single second of this brief sanctuary. A quirky or fringe tidbit from accounts of Western travellers who witnessed the system suggests that some ultra-endurance messengers would actually request to be violently massaged or even beaten lightly with leather straps by the station attendants during their short breaks. This intense friction was believed to rapidly restore blood flow to paralysed numb limbs and prevent the muscles from permanently locking up. You bypass the massage tonight, opting instead to collapse onto a heavy felt rug near the hearth, shoving a wooden bowl of hot, greasy broth and meat into your face as fast as humanly possible. The heat of the soup spreads through your chest, making your eyes impossibly heavy. You lie back on the rough floor, using your own sheepskin cloak as a makeshift pillow. Historians still argue whether these messengers were strictly forbidden from sleeping for more than an hour at these stations, or if the station masters had the legal authority to force a completely delirious rider to sleep for a full cycle to ensure the Imperial messages weren't lost to a fatal mistake on the trail. Just as your mind begins to completely dissolve into a deep, dreamless void, a firm hand shakes your shoulder. Your time is up. Your fresh horse is saddled, the message pouch has been transferred, and the cold, dark steppe is calling your name once again. Stepping out of the smoky warmth of the station, yurt is like jumping straight into an icy lake. The midnight air cuts right through your layers of wool and silk, snapping you out of your brief, deep sleep with a violent shiver. Your new horse is fresh, skittish, and entirely unbothered by the fact that you feel like a walking corpse. You haul yourself back into the saddle, your muscles screaming in protest, and head back out into the pitch-black wilderness. The gentle, rolling hills of the daytime steppe have transformed into a gauntlet of freezing winds and biting dust that whips across your face, stinging your eyes and clouding your vision. Mainstream historical fact documents that these messengers wore specialised heavily layered clothing, designed specifically to combat the brutal shifts in the nomadic climate, including a windproof silk undershirt, thick wool tunics, and an outer coat of animal fur or heavy leather. But even the finest gear can only do so much against a localised dust storm at 2 in the morning. To survive the elements without losing your way or freezing, you pull your leather hood low and lean down until your face is practically buried in the horse's thick mane, shielding yourself from the flying debris. Fighting the weather requires a bizarre combination of physical shielding and mental detachment. A quirky fringe tidbit from old nomadic survival lore mentions that riders would sometimes smear a thick layer of animal fat, often marmot or sheep tallow, directly onto their exposed facial skin before a night ride. This grotesque grease barrier acted as a crude shield against both severe frostbite and the abrasive, skin-stripping dust storms. Remember that tight silk or linen binding you wrapped around your torso earlier? Right now, it's the only thing keeping your core warm, as the wind tries to rip the breath right out of your lungs. You close your eyes for long stretches, relying entirely on the horse's instincts to keep moving forward through the blinding dark. The absolute isolation of the night ride amplifies your exhaustion to a dangerous degree. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rate among these frontier messengers was primarily caused by violent encounters with bandits and wild predators, or if the vast majority simply succumbed to the sheer physical toll of hypothermia and sleep deprivation on stormy nights just like this one. Every gust of wind sounds like a distant voice calling your name, and the steady, rhythmic pounding of the hooves starts to feel less like a journey and more like a permanent state of being. You shake your head violently, blinking away the dust and the heavy fog of sleep, forcing your eyes to scan the darkness ahead for any sign of the next horizon. The deepest, darkest hour before the dawn is when your mind begins to truly fracture under the weight of total sleep deprivation. The endless expanse of the steppe under the faint starlight stops looking like grass and begins to morph into terrifying, shifting shapes. You look out into the darkness and swear you see ancient cities rising from the dirt, or massive armies marching silently alongside you, only for the illusions to dissolve back into empty hills the moment you blink. Your body has gone completely numb. You can no longer feel your feet in the stirrups, and your hands are practically frozen to the leather reins. You're operating entirely on muscle memory, and the primal urge to just keep moving forward. Mainstream historical fact reminds us that the sheer scale of this empire was held together entirely by this psychological and physical resilience, creating a network that spanned from the shores of the Pacific all the way to Eastern Europe. But out here, alone in the dark, the grand scope of the empire doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the next mile. You find yourself slipping into a deep micro-sleep, your body slumping dangerously to the left, only for your knee to clip a low-hanging shrub, jolting you back into reality with a gasp. Surviving this final stretch requires finding anchors to reality. A quirky or fringe tidbit from nomadic oral histories suggests that when riders reached this level of extreme delirium, they would deliberately sing long, droning epic poems or chants, not for entertainment, but because the vibrations of their own voices in their chests helped stabilize their inner ears and kept them from slipping off the horse in their sleep. Remember that intense, sour taste of the yak curd from the very beginning of your journey? You reach into your pouch for one last crumbled piece, letting the sharp acidity shock your senses one final time as the very first edge of the sun begins to bleed a pale, cold blue onto the eastern horizon. The long night is finally breaking. Historians still argue whether the extreme physical toll of this lifestyle meant that a yam messenger's career lasted only a few short years before their bodies were completely broken, or if these riders were so perfectly adapted to the saddle from early childhood that they could sustain this brutal pace for decades. Ahead of you, the silhouette of the next relay station begins to materialize in the morning mist, marking the successful end of another impossible leg. As the destination draws near, the urgent rhythm of the journey begins to soften. The wild, frantic pacing of the horse slows down to a gentle, rocking walk, and the harsh winds of the night die down into a quiet, cool breeze that brushes softly across the grass. The heavy, demanding pressure in your chest lifts, replaced by a profound, comforting stillness. Your long watch is over, the message is safe, and the endless horizon has finally given way to a place of rest. You can let go of the reins now. You can let your shoulders drop and allow your eyes to close completely. The ground beneath you is steady, the world around you is quiet, and the soft, repetitive rustle of the steppe grass is whispering that it's finally time to sleep. Lean back into the safety of the dark, breathe in the cool, still air, and let yourself drift away into a deep, unbroken, and well-deserved rest. Hey guys, tonight we are peering through the heavy velvet curtains of the 19th century, right into the stifling, coal-dusted heart of a Victorian drawing room. Picture yourself standing there, the air thick with the scent of floor wax and unburnt gas, your lungs feeling a bit heavy as you adjust the lace collar that's currently scratching your neck into a fine red line. You look at the clock. It's only 2 p.m, but the sheer intensity of managing a household that seems to exist solely to collect soot is already pulling at your eyelids like heavy lead weights. You probably won't survive this afternoon without a secret escape, because the Victorian ideal of constant bustling productivity is a lie that would leave a modern office worker trembling in their ergonomic chair. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop a comment with your location and your local time. I love knowing where in the world you're drifting off to. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We like to think of the Victorians as these tireless titans of industry, perpetually stoking the engines of the Industrial Revolution with one hand, while writing moralising pamphlets with the other. It's a compelling image, isn't it? The reality is that the Victorian domestic sphere was a pressure cooker of performative busywork. If you were the lady of the house, you weren't just living, you were curating a museum of propriety. You had to oversee the staff, manage the accounts, navigate the labyrinthine etiquette of calling cards, and maintain a face of unflappable calm, even while the housemaid was likely burning the toast, and the coal smoke was turning your curtains a nice shade of charcoal grey. It's a mainstream historical fact that the Victorians were obsessed with the clock. The factory system bled into the home, turning daily life into a series of rigid, time-stamped obligations. But here's a quirk for you. Despite that obsession, the era saw an explosion in nervous complaints and hysteria, which were really just the Victorian way of saying, I am absolutely exhausted, and if one more person asks me about the status of the linens, I might actually scream. Historians still argue whether this increase in reported fatigue was a genuine medical phenomenon, caused by the crushing expectations of the time, or if it was a subtle subconscious rebellion against a society that demanded perfection at every waking second. You feel the weight of those expectations now as you stand in the foyer, the ticking of the grandfather clock sounding less like a heartbeat and more like a countdown. The myth of the tireless housewife is crumbling around you, and frankly, you deserve a break. You aren't a machine, and the Victorian house wasn't built for human comfort. It was built for appearances. And appearances, as you're starting to realise, are incredibly draining. You slip away from the bustling kitchen, your skirts rustling like dry leaves against the polished mahogany of the hallway. The house is a maze of dark corners and heavy drapes, designed not for the free flow of air or light, but for the containment of reputation. You find your way to the withdrawing room, a space explicitly intended for retreat, though in reality it was often used as a stage for receiving guests. But right now, the doors are shut. The heavy fringe of the curtains muffles the distant, discordant clatter of the household staff, and you have finally found your sanctuary. The architecture of the Victorian home was a masterpiece of compartmentalisation. Every room had a distinct moral purpose, and the withdrawing room was your designated zone of quietude, even if you had to perform a delicate dance of social engineering to keep it truly private. It's fascinating how we think of these homes as sprawling mansions, yet for the housewife they were often prisons of floor-to-ceiling decor where every chair had a specific angle and every doily had a strategic mission. Consider this. There is a fringe, slightly hilarious tidbit that some Victorian ladies utilised a clever, unspoken signal involving the positioning of a specific lamp in the window. If the lamp was turned a certain way, it meant, "Do not disturb under penalty of social ruin," essentially a 19th century version of the "Do Not Disturb" sign you might hang on a hotel door. It was a silent language, a way to claim autonomy in a house that technically belonged to everyone except you. Historians still argue whether this obsession with separating rooms based on function was purely a product of the rising middle-class desire to mimic the aristocracy, or if it was a desperate psychological coping mechanism to avoid going stir-crazy from constant confinement. You look around the room now. The heavy wallpaper with its intricate, dizzying floral pattern seems to recede, and the velvet upholstery of the chaise longue beckons. It's not just a piece of furniture, it's an architectural solution to the problem of burnout. You aren't just taking a break, you're occupying a physical space designed for the preservation of your sanity. The house, in its rigid, overly formal way, has provided the exact nook you need to disappear. You sink into the fabric, the tension in your shoulders beginning to dissolve as you realise that for the next hour, the rest of the world effectively ceases to exist. You lie there, the silence of the withdrawing room enveloping you like a heavy, comforting quilt. But the silence isn't entirely empty. It's seasoned by the faint, clinking anticipation of the afternoon tea ritual brewing in the kitchens below. You know that soon the silver tray will arrive, the delicate china, the toasted scones, and the pungent dark brew that served as the Victorian era's primary performance-enhancing drug. It is a mainstream historical fact that the ritual of afternoon tea, popularised by the Duchess of Bedford in the 1840s, was explicitly invented to bridge the sinking feeling between lunch and dinner. What we call a civilised social habit, they called a physiological necessity. Here is a quirky bit of history for you. While the tea was meant to provide a quick jolt of caffeine, the sheer amount of sugar and refined carbohydrates served alongside it, those mountains of clotted cream, jams and tiny sandwiches, often triggered a massive insulin spike followed by a bone-deep, sleepy crash. The restorative nap was often a direct reaction to the restorative tea. You were essentially fueling up just to have the strength to collapse again. It's a hilarious, self-defeating cycle when you look at it through the lens of modern nutrition, but back then it was just being a lady. Historians still argue whether the afternoon tea ritual was a genuine life-saving nutritional break for women who were otherwise restricted to starvation-level portions during dinner, or if it was merely a convenient social theatre to mask the fact that they were all falling asleep in their chairs. You feel that exact sensation now. A drowsy, tea-induced haze settling into your bones. Your eyelids are fluttering, fighting the urge to stay open, but the temptation of the nap is far stronger than the need for another cup of Earl Grey. Remember that lamp signal we talked about in the last section? Well, you didn't just turn the lamp to avoid guests. You turned it to ensure that when the maid brought the tea, she would place it silently on the side table and retreat without a word. You are managing the staff like a silent conductor of a nap-based orchestra. The tea is a decoy, a polite, socially acceptable excuse to withdraw into the horizontal world. As the warmth of the room lulls you, you realise that the most powerful thing a Victorian woman could do wasn't to host a party, but to successfully navigate the day without being forced to attend one. The tea is cold, the room is still, and you are finally blissfully drifting off. The corset is, without question, the most misunderstood piece of engineering in history. As you shift on the chaise longue, you can feel the rigid busk, that sturdy central stay, pressing against your torso, a constant, unyielding reminder of the silhouette you're expected to maintain. You've heard the horror stories, of course, the ones claiming these garments would crush your ribs into a fine powder, or displace your organs like a game of Jenga. In reality, while they were certainly restrictive, they were also remarkably supportive, acting more like a firm architectural scaffolding for your spine. Yet this is exactly why the afternoon nap became a non-negotiable biological requirement rather than a leisurely whim. It is a well-documented historical fact that while the lacing was rarely as lethal as pop culture suggests, wearing a structured corset for 10 to 12 hours a day was an exhausting muscular ordeal. Your core muscles, never getting a moment of genuine relaxation, were essentially doing a continuous low-level plank from dawn until dusk. By the time 3 p.m. rolled around, your body was screaming for a reprieve from the structural integrity you were forced to inhabit. That's the quirky reality. You weren't just napping because you were delicate. You were napping because your torso was essentially trapped in a firm, fashionable cage that required a strategic horizontal release just to restore circulation and ease the tension in your back. Historians still argue whether the decline of the corset at the turn of the century was primarily a victory for women's liberation, or simply a byproduct of the rising trend towards sports and physical activity that required actual movement. Regardless of the ideological shift, you know the truth. You need that release. You reach behind you, your fingers fumbling slightly with the laces. There is a specific blissful sound, a long, audible sigh of fabric as the pressure eases, that is perhaps the most satisfying sensation of the entire Victorian experience. You aren't just lying down, you're conducting a tactical, full-body decompression. You recall that sinking feeling from the tea break mentioned earlier, and now you understand why it was so acute. With your corset loosened, you can finally breathe deeply, filling your lungs properly for the first time all day. It's a quiet, private rebellion. You are trading the rigid, upright, moral posture required by society for the sagging, blissful freedom of a horizontal sprawl. The corset is now nothing more than a discarded heap on the floor, and you, for the first time since breakfast, belong entirely to yourself. The shadows in the room have stretched and deepened, turning the familiar corners into soft velvet grey pools of nothingness. You lie here, liberated from the corset, the tea-induced fog finally coalescing into a deep velvety peace. It is strange to think that these stolen moments, tucked away in the withdrawing room, were actually the genesis of a much larger shift in how we view the human body's need for rest. You aren't just a Victorian housewife hiding from her duties, you are a pioneer of the midday reset. It is a mainstream historical fact that the siesta culture, once mocked by industrious Northern Europeans, eventually found its way into the professional vernacular as a legitimate method for increasing afternoon cognitive function, though it took us nearly a century to admit we were just copying the lazy habits of our ancestors. Here is a final quirky tidbit. Some Victorian physicians actually prescribed rest cures for women, which, despite being dreadfully misused in some psychiatric contexts, did acknowledge the simple, revolutionary truth that sometimes the most medical thing a person can do is lie down in a dark room and stop talking to people. Historians still argue whether these rest periods were a genuine advancement in therapeutic medicine, or simply a way for men to keep women docile and out of the way for half the day. It's a bit of both, isn't it? But as you drift toward the edge of consciousness, that nuance doesn't matter much. You think back on the long, exhausting day, the soot, the stifling corsetry, the performative tea, and the clever, silent language of the lamps. You've navigated it all with a grace that was entirely your own. You didn't just survive the Victorian era, You found a way to carve out a pocket of stillness in a world that was hell-bent on keeping you upright and busy. You've mastered the art of the intentional pause. The air in the room feels cool now, and your breathing has slowed to match the rhythmic, steady pace of the house, settling into the evening. There is no more need for the corset, no more need for the tea, and no more need to monitor the clock. You have reached the end of your tether, and it's perfectly fine to let go. The weight of the world is dissolving, slipping away like sand through an hourglass, leaving only the soft velvet darkness behind. Everything you needed to do is finished. Everything you needed to prove is behind you. There is only the quiet, the cool sheets, and the invitation to simply be. Let the stillness grow until it fills the room, until it fills your chest, until there is nothing left but a slow, fading hum of peace. Just let go and let yourself drift. Drifting, fading, settling into the long, dark, beautiful quiet. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto the sun-drenched wooden planks of a traditional medieval dhow, setting out to ride the great invisible highways of the Indian Ocean alongside elite Swahili navigators. Imagine steering a vessel held together entirely by coconut fibre rope, completely at the mercy of massive seasonal wind shifts that dictate whether you make it to India or end up drifting toward Antarctica. Honestly, you probably won't survive this level of maritime intensity, but luckily you get to experience it from the absolute safety of your bed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in, go ahead and drop your current location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where in the world you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the wooden stern of a dhow docked in the vibrant harbour of Kilwa, your bare feet absorbing the rhythmic, low-frequency thrum of the tide against the hull. The air is thick with the scent of salt, drying fish and the rich, sweet aroma of mangrove timber stacked high on the shore. It is the season of the Kaskazi, the predictable northeastern monsoon wind that blows faithfully from November to March, acting as a massive continental-scale conveyor belt, pushing merchants down the East African coast. You are a sailor in the global trading network of the Swahili coast, and your job for the next few months is to read the sky like an open map, letting the wind do the heavy lifting while you try to get some shut-eye between your watches. Mainstream historical fact confirms that the Swahili civilization was a sophisticated network of independent, wealthy city-states like Mombasa, Zanzibar and Kilwa that dominated Indian Ocean trade for centuries by masterfully exploiting these seasonal monsoons to connect Africa, the Middle East and Asia. But knowing the macroeconomics doesn't make the ocean any less vast when you look out past the reef. As the crew unfurls the massive triangular sail, it catches the Kaskazi with a loud, satisfying thwop that echoes across the water. The boat heels over slightly, cutting a smooth path through the turquoise waves. To keep your mind sharp as the coastline slowly shrinks into a thin green line, you check the guide ropes. A quirky, fringe tidbit from old maritime folklore suggests that Swahili captains would sometimes hang small bags of crushed cloves near the rudder, not just for good luck, but because the sharp, spicy scent helped clear the sinuses of a sleepy helmsman during the grueling midnight shifts. It smells like a holiday kitchen mixed with ocean spray, a strange but comforting combination out here in the blue. The repetitive hiss-whoosh of the water parting at the bow becomes a steady hypnotic lullaby, vibrating up through the wooden deck. Historians still argue whether these early Swahili navigators relied purely on empirical visual observation of the waves and coastal landmarks, or if they possessed secret, highly advanced mathematical charts that have simply been lost to time. Either way, as the afternoon sun begins its slow, warm descent, painting the Indian Ocean in shades of deep indigo and gold, your eyelids grow heavy. The vast expanse of the sea swallows all earthly noise, leaving only the steady hum of the wind and the gentle rocking cradle of the dhow. The rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers becomes your entire world as the afternoon light matures into a soft, golden haze. The sharp scent of the clove bags near the rudder has mellowed into a faint, comforting background note, leaving you to contend with the warm, heavy air drifting off the sail. This is where the true artistry of the Swahili sailor comes alive. understanding the precise mathematical geometry of the lateen sail. You aren't operating a modern mechanised sailboat with metal winches. Instead, you are managing a massive triangular canvas stitched from heavy cotton fabric, suspended from a long, angled wooden yardarm that creaks like an old floorboard every time the wind shifts. You lean your back against a smooth bundle of wrapped export cargo, letting your body sway naturally with the gentle pitch and roll of the hull. Mainstream historical fact dictates that the invention of the triangular lateen sail was a monumental breakthrough in maritime engineering, allowing vessels to sail closer to the wind than traditional square-rigged ships, and granting Swahili traders unparalleled flexibility along the treacherous reef-lined coasts. You watch the sail track across the blue sky, its sharp peak pointing like an arrowhead toward your distant destination. The beauty of this design lies in its organic simplicity. The entire ship is held together without a single iron nail. Instead, the planks are meticulously sewn together using coir, a highly resilient rope made from woven coconut husks. Living life on a sewn boat means developing a hypersensitive relationship with the structure beneath you. A quirky tidbit passed down through generations of coastal shipwrights claims that these flexible coconut-sewn hulls actually possessed a distinct advantage over rigid, iron-fastened ships. When hitting a hidden coral sandbar, a sewn dhow would slightly flex and absorb the impact like a spring, rather than instantly shattering its keel. This organic elasticity gives the ship a uniquely lively feel, as if you are riding a giant breathing sea creature that bends and sighs with every passing swell. It is a deeply soothing sensation, almost like being cradled in a giant wooden hammock suspended over the abyss. Your vision blurs slightly as you watch the complex web of rigging ropes slice through the sky. Historians still argue whether the geometric design of the lateen sail originated independently along the Swahili coast before spreading to the Mediterranean, or if it was the result of centuries of fluid, cross-cultural exchange between Arabian, African and Indian mariners. Remember those crushed clove bags from earlier? The scent wafts past again as the wind adjusts, a gentle reminder of the human presence guiding this elegant machine. The sun finally dips below the horizon, pulling a blanket of deep violet over the ocean and signalling the arrival of the night watch, where the real navigation begins. The deep velvet of the tropical night wraps around the dhow, transforming the Indian Ocean into a mirror of the cosmos above. With the coastline completely gone, the Swahili navigator's true genius shines through the dark, reading the celestial map and the subtle language of the underwater swells. You sit cross-legged on the wooden deck, your eyes tracking the familiar march of the Southern Cross across the sky. The cool night air feels clean and crisp against your skin, a welcome relief from the baking heat of the daytime sun. Mainstream historical fact highlights that Swahili sailors possessed an incredibly sophisticated understanding of star navigation, utilising the altitude of key constellations above the horizon to pinpoint their exact latitude along the East African coast. They paired this stellar data with an intimate knowledge of the Bahari, the open sea currents, and the specific cadence of deep-sea swells that rolled thousands of miles across the ocean floor. By feeling the way the hull lifts and pitches, a skilled navigator can tell if the ship is drifting off course into the treacherous Mozambique Channel or staying safely on the deep water highway. Navigating by touch and starlight requires a profound connection to the natural world. A quirky fringe tidbit from local coastal lore suggests that master navigators could actually identify their proximity to specific islands or mainland deltas in total darkness simply by tasting the salinity and sediment levels of the seawater scooped up from over the side of the hull. You dip a hand into the dark, rushing water, feeling its cool silkiness slide through your fingers. Remember that flexible, coconut-sewn hull from the afternoon. Tonight, its rhythmic flexing acts as an acoustic amplifier, turning the deep-sea swells into a low, resonant hum that vibrates right through your feet and into your chest, singing you to sleep. The absolute stillness of the open ocean midwatch can easily lull a tired sailor into a waking dream. Historians still argue whether these navigators used early variants of the kamal, a simple navigational tool consisting of a wooden card and a knotted string held between the teeth to measure star altitude, or if their methods were so entirely internalized through oral poetry and song that they required no physical tools whatsoever. You look up at the vast dome of stars, their brilliant white light reflecting off the dark water like thousands of tiny candles. The gentle, repetitive slap hiss of the waves against the sewn planks creates a perfect meditative rhythm, washing away your exhaustion and inviting you to drift into a peaceful starry slumber. The gentle rocking of the midnight waves eventually gives way to a low, comforting rumble, as the dawn light reveals the distinct silhouettes of a Swahili stone town rising elegantly from the shoreline. After days of nothing but open water and the infinite dome of stars, the sight of a bustling coastal sanctuary is incredibly grounding. Coral rag palaces, whitewashed mosques, and sprawling markets come into focus, their architectural lines reflecting a unique blend of African innovation and cosmopolitan trade. The dhow glides past the outer coral reefs, navigating a well-known deep-water channel that leads straight into the safety of the calm, sheltered harbour. Mainstream historical fact documents that these Swahili stone towns operated as massive, wealthy trading hubs that funneled prized goods from the African interior, including gold, ivory and high-quality iron, out to the global markets of India, China and the Arabian Peninsula. As your vessel gently bumps against the wooden pier, the air becomes thick with a heady cocktail of aromas, drying tobacco, freshly roasted coffee, and crates of premium spices like cinnamon and cardamom waiting for export. It is an overwhelming sensory shift from the sterile, salt-crusted isolation of the open sea. Finding your land legs after days at sea is always a disorienting experience. A quirky fringe tidbit from old Port Town records indicates that incoming sailors would often seek out specialised herbalists in the market, who brewed a thick, bitter tea made from local baobab bark. This drink was highly sought after because it was believed to immediately cure the land sickness, the frustrating, dizzying sensation where the solid earth feels like it is still pitching and rolling beneath your feet. Remember that animal fat we used as grease protection back on the windy steppe? Out here, you exchange those harsh survival methods for the luxury of a cool bath and fresh coconut oil to soothe your sun-baked skin. The vibrant energy of the harbour slowly begins to wind down as the hot afternoon sun drives the merchants and sailors into the cool, deep shadows of the town's narrow alleyways. Historians still argue whether the extreme wealth generated in these independent city-states led to fierce, competitive naval warfare between neighbouring ports, or if they maintained a highly cooperative, treaty-based economic peace to keep the vital trade routes flowing smoothly. You find a quiet, shaded spot on a smooth stone bench beneath a massive mango tree, listening to the distant, muffled chatter of the market. The heavy, grounding warmth of the stone beneath you creates a perfect anchor, letting the chaotic sounds of the port melt into a soft, distant hum that coaxes you into a deep, midday nap. The long months of trading in the vibrant stone town pass like a fleeting dream, and the heavy, humid air begins to shift once more, signalling that the great seasonal wheel of the Indian Ocean has finally turned. The predictable Kaskazi wind that brought you south has completely died away, replaced now by the powerful, steady breath of the Kusi, the southern monsoon wind that blows faithfully from April to September. This is the grand return ticket for every Swahili dhow along the coast, a reliable southern wind machine that will gently carry your heavily laden vessel back northward toward home. Mainstream historical fact emphasises that the entire economic calendar of the medieval Swahili world was synchronised with these precise planetary wind systems, creating a relaxed, non-rushed rhythm where merchants and sailors would spend months at a single destination, integrating into the local society while waiting for the seasons to reverse. You watch the crew unfurl the great lateen sail one last time, watching it swell gracefully with the cool, steady air of the Kusi. The ship feels heavier now, riding lower in the water due to the valuable cargoes of copper, silks, and pottery packed securely beneath the deck planks. The voyage home brings a profound sense of ease and familiarity. A quirky or fringe tidbit from historical logs of coastal fishermen suggests that during this return journey, sailors would attach small hollow seed pods to the long steering lines of the rudder. As the boat glided forward at a safe, steady pace, the wind rushing through the pods would create a soft, whistling, flute-like sound that reassured the resting crew that the ship was maintaining its perfect heading through the water. Remember that dizzying land sickness and the bitter baobab bark tea from your time in port? All of that is forgotten now as your body merges once again with the fluid, predictable motion of the sea, the hull sliding effortlessly over the deep blue rollers, The frantic energy of the busy harbours and the complex calculations of the outward journey dissolve into a peaceful, routine clarity. Historians still argue whether the legendary wealth of the Swahili trading elite eventually declined due to sudden shifts in these global climate patterns, or if it was the disruptive arrival of foreign naval empires that finally fractured this ancient, peaceful network of wind and water. Ahead of you, the familiar coastline of your home port begins to trace its way across the horizon, bathed in the soft, warm light of the late afternoon sun. As the final destination draws near, the urgent rhythm of the maritime world begins to soften into a quiet, meditative stillness. The wild, open expanses of the ocean give way to the calm, glassy waters of the protected coastal lagoons, and the heavy pressure of the wind against the canvas slowly releases. The great sail is lowered with a quiet, rustling sigh, and the dhow settles peacefully into its native waters. Your long journey is complete, the valuable cargo is safe, and the great monsoon winds have delivered you precisely back to where you belong. You can let go of the rigging lines now. You can let your shoulders sink down and allow your eyelids to close entirely. The world around you is perfectly safe. The ship is secure at its moorings, and the gentle, repetitive lap of the tide against the wooden hull is whispering that your watch is finally over. Lean back into the comforting, rhythmic cradle of the dark, breathe in the cool, salt-kissed air, and let yourself drift away into a deep, unbroken and beautifully peaceful rest. Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the meticulously manicured, highly stressful world of a 19th century estate to unravel the absurdly rigid domestic etiquette behind Victorian breakfast rules. Imagine trying to enjoy a simple morning meal, but you are confronted by an absolute minefield of specialised silver cutlery, hyper-specific serving timelines, and a piece of bread that requires its own architectural cooling tower. Honestly, you probably won't survive this level of high society social anxiety before your morning caffeine kick, but luckily you get to experience it from the absolute safety of your bed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're settling in, go ahead and drop your current location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where in the world you guys are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the chilly wood-panelled hallway of a grand country house, just as the first pale light of morning filters through the heavy velvet drapes. The air carries the distinct, comforting scent of burning anthracite coal mixed with the rich, slightly heavy aroma of roasting coffee beans. You step into the breakfast room, where the table is a blinding sea of starched white damask linen and polished silver. Your immediate task is to oversee the preparation of the most deceptively complex item on the menu, a basic slice of toast. In the kitchen below, a scullery maid is currently kneeling before a massive open-fire cast-iron range, holding a long-handled wire-toasting fork with the intense, unblinking focus of a bomb technician. Mainstream historical fact reminds us that the Victorians completely transformed breakfast from a casual fluid morning snack into a massive, highly structured domestic ritual designed to showcase a family's wealth, industrial discipline, and moral rectitude. If a slice of bread was charred even slightly unevenly, it was seen as a direct reflection of a breakdown in household efficiency. To keep your energy up while watching this high-stakes carbohydrate choreography, you reach for a small cup of weak morning tea. A quirky fringe tidbit from domestic manuals of the 1880s reveals that some high society households actually employed a dedicated bread trimmer, whose sole job was to cut off the crusts of the toast into perfect, mathematically identical equilateral triangles before they were sent upstairs. It sounds like a bit of an administrative overreach for a Wednesday morning, but presentation was everything. The gentle, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner blends with the soft metallic clink of the silver toasting forks, creating a beautifully soothing, repetitive soundscape. Historians still argue whether this hyperfixation on breakfast perfection was driven by genuine culinary obsession, or if it was merely a rigid psychological mechanism used by the rising middle class to distance themselves from the unstructured lifestyles of the working poor. Either way, as the morning sun begins to warm the room, casting soft shadows across the silver platters, your mind starts to drift. The quiet, hushed atmosphere of the house settles over you, leaving only the warmth of the fire and the slow, peaceful cadence of a Victorian morning. The rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock continues to anchor the quiet room, as the golden morning light creeps further across the table. Now that the bread has been toasted to a mathematically precise shade of pale amber, it faces its most harrowing socio-cultural challenge, the tyranny of the toast rack. You watch as a footman carefully places the freshly toasted triangles into a slotted silver contraption that looks less like tableware and more like a miniature Victorian bicycle rack. You aren't permitted to simply stack your toast on a warm porcelain plate like a normal, sensible human being. Instead, each slice must be isolated in its own private, cold metal slot. Mainstream historical fact dictates that the invention of the silver toast rack was born out of a bizarre architectural obsession with preventing condensation. The Victorians absolutely loathed a soggy slice of bread, believing that if warm toast was allowed to touch another warm slice, the trapped steam would ruin the crispness and render the food vulgar and unpalatable. Therefore, the toast rack was engineered to maximise airflow, cooling the bread down as rapidly as humanly possible. The irony, of course, is that by the time this structural masterpiece reaches your seat at the table, the toast is completely, unforgivably freezing cold. You sit back in your heavily carved mahogany chair, allowing your body to sink into the plush leather cushions, swaying slightly to the hypnotic slow motion of the household routine. Living life by the unyielding rules of the breakfast table means finding peace in these strange, over-engineered pauses. A quirky tidbit found in the margins of 19th century butler guides claims that some exceptionally wealthy households utilised a specialised undertow spirit lamp, essentially a tiny, roaring fire hazard placed directly beneath the silver rack to keep the bottom edges of the vertical bread warm while the tops froze. Remember that dedicated bread trimmer from the kitchen earlier? Their hard work is currently on full chilly display, sitting rigidly in a silver cage. The soft metallic ting of your silver knife tapping against the side of the rack creates a delicate melodic chime that echoes softly through the quiet room. Your vision softens as you stare at the geometric perfection of the cold bread. Historians still argue whether the physical design of the toast rack was intentionally popularised by silversmiths simply to sell more highly specialised redundant luxury items to gullible suburban families, or if the British upper classes genuinely possessed an evolutionary distaste for warm, pliable carbohydrates. Either way, the sheer predictability of this ridiculous breakfast bureaucracy acts as a soothing balm for the senses. As you reach out with a gloved hand to slide a perfectly crisp, chilled triangle from its silver prison, the quiet warmth of the room embraces you, making your eyelids feel impossibly heavy in the soft morning hush. The chilly perfection of the vertical bread sitting in its silver cage brings you face to face with the next administrative hurdle of the morning, the intricate social politics of applying dairy. You pick up a highly specialised silver butter knife, which features a peculiar scimitar-like curved blade designed specifically to prevent a gentleman or lady from accidentally scraping the porcelain lining of the butter dish. You aren't simply spreading fat onto a piece of bread, you're navigating a dense minefield of 19th century dietary anxiety and class warfare. Mainstream historical fact reminds us that the Victorian era was plagued by massive food adulteration scandals, particularly regarding chemical margarine, or oleomargarine, an industrialised butter substitute made from beef fat and milk fat that was frequently smuggled into wealthy households by unscrupulous grocers. Real, pure dairy butter was a symbol of absolute financial transparency, and serving it in perfectly moulded, ice-chilled spheres was a direct flex of a family's economic purity. You gently slice off a thin curl of the hard, chilled butter, attempting to spread it over your freezing toast without accidentally shattering the fragile, brittle structure of the bread. Managing cold fat on cold carbs requires a zen-like level of physical patience. A quirky, fringe tidbit from historical domestic journals reveals that some experimental health gurus of the 1890s advocated for the practice of double buttering, a bizarre etiquette loophole where a diner would spread a layer of butter, scrape it entirely off to prove the bread wasn't soggy, and then reapply a fresh layer before consumption. Remember those crushed clove bags from that Swahili dhow we sailed on last night? The bracing, aromatic memory of the open sea stands in stark, amusing contrast to the cloistered, heavy silence of this stuffy English breakfast room. The dull, muffled scrape of your silver knife against the crisp grain of the toast creates a rhythmic, white noise scratch that is oddly soothing. Your focus blurs as you watch the butter curl softly under the blade. Historians still argue whether these hyper-specific table manners were genuinely adhered to by the average suburban family during their rushed morning commutes to the city, or if these exhausting rules existed primarily as an idealised, unattainable fantasy published in etiquette books to keep middle-class housewives in a state of perpetual guilt. Either way, the slow, methodical process of preparing this single bite of food forces you to slow down your breathing. The world outside these heavy wool curtains can wait. For now, your entire reality is reduced to the quiet, hypnotic scrape of silver on toast. The slow, hypnotic scratch of your silver knife finally ceases as you successfully navigate the butter crisis, only to realise that your solitary piece of crisp, cold bread is merely a small island in a massive sea of side dish bureaucracy. You look up from your plate to scan the long sideboard, where a row of heavy domed silver chafing dishes sits over flickering alcohol flames, keeping a terrifyingly complex array of morning proteins at a gentle simmer. Under the rigid domestic expectations of the era, a proper household could not simply offer a choice of cereal. Instead, you're expected to balance your carbohydrate intake against a mountain of heavy kidneys, smoked bloaters, and soft-boiled eggs. Mainstream historical fact emphasises that the Victorian breakfast was a sprawling, multi-course feast designed to fuel the immense physical and mental demands of an expanding empire, with wealthy households routinely offering up to a dozen different hot dishes every single morning. You slide your chair back slightly and approach the silver line, lifting a heavy lid to reveal kedgeree, a popular, comforting Anglo-Indian blend of flaked smoked fish, boiled rice, and hard-boiled eggs seasoned with a mild curry powder. The soft, fragrant steam billows out, warming your face and carrying the distinct, earthy aroma of eastern spices into the damp English morning. Selecting your morning proteins requires adhering to a strict, unspoken hierarchy of consumption. A quirky, fringe tidbit from 19th century medical journals reveals that some prominent London physicians actively warned against eating toast and soft-boiled eggs in the same bite, claiming that the chemical interaction between egg yolk and toasted starch would create a toxic, heavy, gastric paste that permanently sluggishly clogged the digestive tract. Remember that cold animal fat grease barrier we used to fight frostbite on the windy Mongol steppe? It seems the British upper classes faced their own terrifying hazards, albeit hidden inside a silver egg cup. The steady, wet plop-plop of simmering broth from the chafing dishes creates a low, rhythmic background murmur that fills the quiet spaces between the grandfather clock's ticks. Your eyes grow increasingly heavy as you contemplate the sheer volume of food before you. Historians still argue whether the staggering scale of these breakfasts was genuinely consumed by the family members every day, resulting in widespread aristocratic gout, or if the vast majority of these elaborate dishes were prepared simply for theatrical display, only to be silently carted downstairs to be consumed by an army of grateful servants. Either way, the warm, rhythmic hum of the silver heaters acts as a powerful sedative. You return to your seat with nothing more than a single perfectly poached egg to accompany your cold toast, letting the heavy, savoury warmth of the room wash over you as you prepare for the final, peaceful movements of the morning ritual. Section 5. The final, peaceful movements of the morning ritual unfold as you settle back into the plush leather cushions of your mahogany chair, the heavy silver chafing dishes continuing their quiet, simmering dance on the distant sideboard. With your poached egg and cold toast finally finished, you turn your attention to the ultimate component of the Victorian breakfast, the final, silent sip of lukewarm tea. You lift a delicate, translucent bone china teacup by its tiny, loop-shaped handle, ensuring your pinky finger remains perfectly neutral to avoid any vulgar displays of theatrical elegance. The room has descended into an absolute sacred silence, dictated by a strict social expectation that no member of the family should speak a single word before the morning newspapers have been thoroughly digested. Mainstream historical fact documents that the mid-Victorian era saw the rise of the specialised breakfast table newspaper rack, a silver device designed to hold the Times of London completely upright and open at eye level, effectively creating a physical wall of text between a husband and wife to ensure zero verbal communication took place during the meal. This enforced silence wasn't considered rude. Rather, it was viewed as a vital psychological necessity to protect the fragile nerves of the household from the jarring friction of human interaction too early in the day. You take a slow, rhythmic sip of the dark, amber liquid, letting the gentle warmth coat your throat as you stare at the crisp, black print of the unmoving pages before you. Finding tranquility within this rigid morning silence requires a complete surrender to the stillness of the room. A quirky, fringe tidbit from high society diaries reveals that some eccentric aristocrats were so utterly terrified of morning noise that they forced their domestic servants to wear soft, thick-soled slippers woven entirely from camel hair, ensuring that an entire three-course breakfast could be served, cleared, and packed away without a single audible footstep ever breaking the peace. Remember that rhythmic white noise scratching of the silver knife against the cold toast from earlier? Now even that sound has faded, leaving only the slow, hypnotic sway of the velvet curtains as a soft breeze rustles the window glass. The absolute unyielding predictability of this domestic schedule completely detaches your mind from the anxieties of the modern world. Historians still argue whether this intense enforcement of morning isolation and silence was a genuine reflection of Victorian emotional coldness, or if it was actually a deeply compassionate, protective boundary, designed to give individuals a few precious moments of absolute meditative peace before they were forced to face the chaotic industrial world outside. Either way, the heavy, warm atmosphere of the room begins to slow your breathing down to a deep, natural rhythm. As the breakfast hour draws to a formal close, the rigid structures and complicated rules of the table begin to gently soften into a hazy, comforting blur. The sharp, bright reflections on the polished silver platters grow dim as a passing cloud glides across the morning sun, wrapping the room in a gentle, dim shadow. The steady, heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seems to slow its pace, lengthening the spaces between each beat until time itself feels beautifully suspended. There are no more silver knives to balance, no more freezing slices of bread to manage, and no more social minefields to navigate. The house around you is perfectly still. The heavy wool drapes muffle the distant sounds of the outside world, and the soft, warm weight of the morning air is inviting you to simply let go of the day before it even begins. You can close your eyes now, leaving the silver and linen behind. Let your shoulders sink completely into the deep cushions, breathe in the calm, quiet stillness of the room, and let yourself float away into a deep, unbroken, and beautifully peaceful sleep.